Lost Paul. There he
Here
is.
we go. Gay Punters back for episode 2 of 2022. And we've got John Walter and myself here. John, of course, from racingwatch.com.au and myself, Paul Daly, from ratingstowin.com.au. So, John, we had the Randwick experience Saturday. Certainly a different track to what Rosehill was the previous week in terms of the way it was, in terms of lanes, I suppose, the most predominant thing. Not so much unexpected. The course proper races, and I'm talking about races 3, 5 and 10, were sort of like in the dead range, 4.6, and the shoot races 1, 2, 4, 6, 7, 8 and 9, which is obviously the majority of the program, at 3.5, so still in that good to dead range. Times were a little bit better than perhaps many were anticipating going into the meeting, and best position, I suppose, shoot within a length or so at the 800, 1 to 3 lengths at the 600, which is not sort of all that surprising given the pace shape of a lot of those races, and also that they were shorter course races. And in terms of the actual other races, 3, 5 and 10, it didn't really matter where you were. In terms of the inside, going into the meeting, 7 to 8 was sort of assumed to be best based on some intel we had, and it sort of probably proved that way. I don't have the final lanes data yet, but certainly way off the inside. By race 4, no one really wanted to be near the inside. So after race 4 was run, it's pretty much everyone was sort of, that 5, 6, 7 off. That was where the leader, or I suppose, artificial rail was. What do you think?
Well, it was weird. It's good weird. We get to tackle 2 really strange meetings the first 2 weeks back, and this one it is strange because obviously there was pretty solid intel that the inside was going to be no good. But like you say, it took them probably 4 races to work out that the inside was no good, or for the riders to ride to that pattern. And by that stage, it looks like they've then decided that leading was no good more than the inside was no good. So now they've decided to run extremely slow tempo races. The riders have picked up on the inside being off, and they've basically turned it into a mad leader bias, which it wasn't. But that's kind of what the circumstances look like they've had unfold. It's a bit of a weird one. I can't understand why it took them 4 races to get off that inside section, to be honest. But and as you said, like, it was probably a bit of a drier track than everyone expected, but the inside was still really, really bad from what I've seen.
Yeah, look, before we get into the program in detail, I'll just quickly mention TopSport. Obviously very excited to have TopSport as our sponsor in terms of what they're going to do going forward. They've kindly put some money up for the best question of the week each week, as deemed by ourselves. There's $100 there, cash prize to the winner, or a credit to their TopSport account. If they don't already have one, they should have. And I figured it might be timely to quickly just go through what TopSport offer in relation to Sydney racing, at least on a Saturday. Now, you've got fixed odds open to win 2,000, which is obviously the minimum from the time they open. They guarantee that. Late, obviously the minimums as well. The moment you've got a black type race on the program, like a Group 2, Group 3 listed, it's 5,000 from the open and 10,000 late. And of course, if there's a Group 1, 10,000 to 25,000, and a feature Group 1, 20 to 50. And there's also best of the best as well, which I think it's 5 or 10,000 limits depending on the race. So look, TopSport will always give you a fair go. There's no such thing as best or worst in this game, but they're always fair and good people to deal with there at TopSport.
Probably the most important thing you said there's from open, as opposed to a lot of the others, which you say not opening prices, bookmakers, opening prices whenever they decide to put the markets up, which is certainly rare for most, I guess. Certainly
valid point, John. Let's get into this program. Race 1, we've got the 2-year-old race there. They call it a listed race there.
I've fallen asleep. Sleep at the wheel.
They've gone out 1.6 lengths slow to the 800, slowed down again to the 600, 3.1 slow. So below average pace through the race in its entirety. John, do you want to talk us through?
Yeah, so as you sort of said, the inside looked like it was a good chance of being off, and this is the race that certainly proved that, I think. But it was still a really solid effort from the winner, Cytheras. It sits outside the leader. Space Walk, what's it called? Space Walk goes to the front. Well backed, stablemate behind it. Sort of over racing there was Plimstock and Lady Laguna, the early favourite, who still started favourite, didn't she? I believe. Sitting 3 wide, which, as it turned out, looks like it wasn't as bad a position as it may have looked initially. So I think the horse least advantage is probably the one on the fence there, who stays on that worst ground. The winner's a good effort, sitting outside leader first trial, and the horse that's at 3 wide had the race experience and probably wasn't as bad a spot, but still a good effort. And the ones down the outside are certainly coming down the better part of the track that's unknown at this stage.
Yeah, I certainly concur with you on that, John. The spacewalk, definitely worst part of the track. It had to be replated too behind the barriers, so that's not a positive in my mind. Lady Laguna, I mean, J-Mac was quite happy to sort of sit there 3 wide, so he'd obviously done his homework on the track, and I don't think it was a disadvantage at all on the day, as can be seen by a couple of other results. Plimstock, as you said, over-raced, and I think the jock suggested that it might now be better off stepping up in trip.
Up in trip, worst ground. I think had a couple of speedy cuts as well, which is nothing really, but it just depends on when it was when they were sustained and that sort of thing. But a few excuses for Plimstock. Certainly too bad to be true.
Indeed.
But the fourth, that first starter Boyfriend was quite interesting. It just looked like it was, even though it comes down the best part, which is scary. Never really got going until that last bit and sort of changed stride and got into it. So I think it's an interesting horse once it gets up over more ground, but obviously a little bit wary that it was in the better part of the track than the other 3.
Okay, so let's move on to race 2, the highway over 1,200 metres. They've gone out 2.7 lengths slow to the 800, 1.1 slow to the 600. So average to below average tempo by the time they got to the 600. And what have we got here, John? Do you want to walk us through some of these runners?
Pretty creepy race, and this is where you sort of see that sitting wide in the run was not really a disadvantage, especially probably over these shorter courses. The winner sits, I think, 4 wide. It's back out here at least 4 wide, no cover. The second horse sits 3 wide, no cover, and it's sort of just behind it, 4 wide. And then who's the rest of the runners? But it's a weird race. This time of year, these country championship horses are starting to kick off. None of them are really wanting to win. You've got ones down that need to get into their heat finals are the ones that are really set for the races. So it's hard to dissect them. There's not much between these horses. You said the running line, like first, second, third, all wide, either no cover or with cover. These horses back on the inside here, certainly forgivable performances, but it's a pretty trashy race, I think, and it's very hard to work out what their motivations are. So just be very wary of country championship, highway races at this time of year is my my suggestion, and especially races sort of in this 1,200 to 1,400 metre range. The 1,000 metre races, they're not affected, but the ones that are aiming up at country championship heats, I get very scared of these races at this time of year.
So Shelby 66 was held up for a big part of the straight there and not really pushed out or tested. It was
Shelby back in here in the purple. Yep.
Yeah, the purple. Yep. 14 to 1 and 10 to 1. Participator was obviously the best backed in the race, 11 to 4 and 9 to 4. Showed a reasonable speed after that trial, which it showed none in. And of course, the winner, we've talked about it already, wide, no cover, no disadvantage.
And he probably had the best run of all of them, Participator. It was the one that had the cover in behind and got to the right part. So no real excuses for it, except for being first up.
Yeah, a little bit disappointing, I think, on face value there. Anything else about race 2, John?
No, I couldn't find anything that I wanted to sort of follow out of the race or anything too exciting. I think it was all pretty well exposed, and I'm just wary of the form.
Okay, we'll move on to the midway, race 3 over a mile. Look, the pace here to the 800 was minus 1.4 lengths, which is pretty much bang on average, and to the 600 minus 0.3. So once again, average tempo in this race. Look, King Ratel, it looked like they were going faster. I think the trainer, Tracy Bartley of McCormack, suggested that he was quite happy with Bowman's ride, given what he thought was a solid tempo. So an example of where the eye can lie. King Ratel with the blinkers first time this preparation confirmed the merit of that last run, despite
That's it,
the
out
fact
the back, missing the kick there again. Yeah, first time in blinkers too.
First time this preparation in blinkers, John.
So
I think you'll find. But what was the other one that missed a kick bad? That was pecuniary interest missed at 15 or something.
Yeah, which is not unusual for it as well.
Yeah, King Ratel there, the obviously big SP last run there, 100-1 SP, but the run was good. So we've got a question about this horse, and we can probably deal with it later. But a bit of specking here for this horse and this winner. French Emperor, definitely the best back, 5-2 into twos, but I thought it was disappointing.
I loved his run last time, King Ratel, but this is the problem. It always looked like it was going to be a slow tempo. He was going to be where he is. So, and that question sort of you got there is quite interesting later, because how do you map a horse that's dropping back in grade, going very well, if nothing? And the thing that sort of helps him, I believe, and as you said, like French Emperor is obviously very disappointing, but none of these riders rode to the pattern, whereas he gets to the best part of the track. So it's a very hard run to evaluate for mine.
Yeah, indeed.
Going forward anyway.
Snow Sneaky, worst part of the track. Ice Crusher, worst part of the track. Didn't get a lot of room that last 100, sort of had to stop riding as it got squeezed.
Yeah, it was probably the one that's the bit of an unknown, I thought, going back through the run. Is Ice Crusher never really got its momentum up or into the better part of the track.
French Emperor, we sack it?
Well, I don't think you can fully sack it. They're carrying on saying it was ridden out of its comfort zone, ridden forward, but it was a slow run race. What the issue is there for me is his last 100 metres is horrendous, as he's stopped terribly, like he's nearly had an issue compared to the rest off a slow tempo. So, and you got So Sneaky, who's you couldn't even get past it. It is a problem. I certainly couldn't have any confidence. I want to see him rebound off that before taking him seriously again. Yeah, absolutely. I think he's got too much ability to sack him, but it is a stable that sort of they don't tend to race completely to their form all the time. So they sort of can go up and down, and that makes him a little bit dangerous. But King Ratel, very dominant. Like this is a nightmare of a horse to follow. Canyonero, I didn't mind its run through the middle either, late, just because of the slow tempo.
I suppose with French Emperor, the thing to note is its other poor run was in the gloaming in a race that was run fairly slowly as well. So perhaps, it just needs a little bit more speed on its races, or at least needs it to be genuine. The blinkers stayed off, didn't it? French Emperor, and they put the blinkers on in that run, actually, in the gloaming that time. But look, lightly raced, as you say, 4 starts. You can't probably sack it yet. It was well backed, obviously fancied. Perhaps they'll ride it with cover next time. And
I thought it would be too good for them. I thought it was sort of the only horse in the race on the way up. Obviously, King Ratel's going okay, but I just thought it might need a little bit further and be in the wrong spot, and ended up sort of saving on Lennon instead in the leader. But it's just those midway races. You really, if you want to be going to better races, I think you want to be winning those sort of races. They're a little bit like highways. They're more midweek form, so they've got to really find the right race next start, I think, to be horses to follow out of these races.
Okay, so let's move on to race 4, the 1,000-metre 94 benchmark race. Look, they've gone out 1.8 lengths slow to the 800, so that's really only 200 metres, which was obviously a slow pace. And then they've gone minus 2.1 to the 600. We should say the other way around, minus 2.1 the first 200, and then minus 1.8 to the 600. So slow to below average tempo by the time they got to the 600. Shadow Crush found the best part of the track. For mine, I thought Sky Command was a horse that was ridden absolutely perfectly. It built its sectionals slowly, and couldn't have ridden it any better, I don't think. Rachel King. And what else? They quickened up 600 to 400. As we said, Shadow Crush, best part of the track. Mosman Gorge bled. So it's out for
Yeah, which is a shame because it's going really well. Morrisman Gorgeous, last 2 runs are really good, probably the best runs I've seen from it. So it's a shame that it's bled. Like as you said, he gets to the better part. He was the race fit horse in the race. I thought the jockey sort of lost his compass a bit there around the bend, and I thought it was a really good effort for this horse to pick up, going up from sort of benchmark 74 grade to beating these horses. And I agree with you. Sky Command, absolutely perfectly ridden. Malkovich, obviously the big weight. This horse bleeds, but I still think it goes as well as it can and doesn't matter going forward. Very strange raid on Kalos and not even attempt to try and get off the inside at any stage. And that probably leaves this horse last man standing strongest, but still, I think what has it gone about 12 above the last 600 or so to come from a position it was in and strong through the line again. So that's twice in a row that horse has really run through the line. So it's going very, very well.
Yeah, certainly is. Kalos was a bit disappointing. There was money for it. Would it race a bit keen, do you think, John?
Keen, but just that fence just looks diabolical. Like that inside section is, I'm not saying anything strange went on, but it's just like they just didn't want anything performing well on the fence. And I know the fence is historically bad there, but just horses that raced on that inside, like nothing has done anything really all day. So it's hard to line up for me how much freshness.
Well,
how much
it's really only the first 4 races, I suppose, where we saw them stick to the inside.
And it's hard to work out how to mark those horses that were in that section early in the day.
Yeah, look, Shadow Crush was a decent performance, but as we say,
he can win again. He can win again, that's for sure, I'd say.
It's going well.
So 2 shadow horses of Mark Newnham's are both racing, just running through the wall. Good on them.
So race 5, the mile 78. Look, they've gone out slow to below average by the time they got to the 600. So to the 800, they've gone out 8.7 slow, and to the 600, 5.8 slow. So no speed here at all. Fleetwood Macca was
this race on Saturday, so I had to make sure I watched it a few times today. I had absolutely no interest in it on Saturday, so this is a
interesting betting moves in this race. Fleetwood Macca was best back 7-1 and 9-2, and through my eyes was the big drifter after being supported early 4-1 out to 6-1, but the BSP was 10-1. It was just absolutely legless late. I must admit I was sort of half interested in this horse through Irish eyes, simply because I thought it showed good sprint through the trial late. It did look like a fairly weak race, and J-Mac had been booked for the stable first up. So it's run some good sectionals.
Yeah, Tempo's just destroyed its chances, right? Like it's actually
Tempo totally destroyed it. Exactly. Probably a nice trial for the prep, as it steps up in distance. But it's just interesting that sort of J-Mac was booked for the ride, and it's
another ride here with Fleetwood Mac where you can see, like even here, the ride is committed to going inside, it seems, and I just don't get it. Like there was probably a run there outside leader if they wanted to persevere at all, and just never made any attempt to get off that inside section.
Yeah, Nardic Thunder, finished off obviously quite well to win.
It's just a suck horse, isn't it? Like it just had the perfect run. It can sprint sharp, and that's what it's got. And I reckon if they go another 100 metres, it probably turns it up and gets beaten. So I think it's completely flattered.
It worries me a bit on face value. I just want to check the times a bit closer, and obviously once we get fully verified times, we'll know a bit more. But this race, just on face value, looked like it might rate a little high, which worries me with some of these, and given the finish and so forth.
Well, yeah, like your bunch margin, you got 2 stayers that were completely unsuited by the tempo, closing in the best part. These guys who had every chance to this on one pace. Fleetwood Mac has gone back to the inside worst section, and this horse is probably close enough to the worst section and not going great either. Yardstick, is it? And probably didn't run the trip. So I agree with you. I think the horses that have run last in the best part of the track are probably the ones that are got the most upside by a long way.
Yeah, look, it was proving a pretty tough day on the punt so far in this meeting. And for me, the only joy I had at all was Shadow Crush. At this stage, I'm behind the 8 ball, and I suppose it's
Shadow Crush was my only result too. I did not. I played in the. No, I played later in the day. Sorry, but yeah, Shadow Crush was a good result.
Okay, so let's step on to race 6, which was the Millennium over 1,100 metres. Here we saw the race go out -2 to the 800 and -3.1 to the 600. So below average tempo. Extravagant Star, which had been well backed, put them away pretty convincingly late. There was a sharp turn of foot, and Paris Dior obviously ran well. Sergedain, is that how it's pronounced? It ran third. So really the first 4 were the top 4 in the betting, save for Bold Inno, which was, I think, lame, John.
Yeah, I thought this win was pretty big, actually. And it was heavily backed from coming off, was it a Ballarat when it was a Melbourne win anyway, the Warrnambool or somewhere. It was crazy. But this horse has got good speed out of the gates, which I know it led all the way its first start. I thought it looked pretty one-paced here, but look how easily it gets. I'm just trying to make a point out of this, how easily it gets on speed. You've got some fast horses, but this horse is strong as well. So a really good set of characteristics this horse is showing early in its career. It's, really fast early, able to relax right behind them, gets every chance here, but they sort of, the two favourites loom up to run past it, runs away from them late. I'm always wary of restricted race, like races in general, especially from sales, but I think this horse is pretty good.
Yeah, look, I thought it trialled quite well. It ran the fastest time of those 7:43. I know that 7:43 heats are a bit of a worry, but I suppose for an 1,100 metre race, they're not too bad. But I thought it did trial reasonably well prior to
there where he gives it one in the left, and it really
it just shoots away, doesn't it?
Yeah. And the last part of its race is really good. I know those horses have sat wide behind it, but they were the 2 favoured runners. And as I said, wide in the run wasn't diabolical there on Saturday.
Interesting to see where these horses can go, but obviously the first 4 across the line, save for the horse that pulled up lame, Bold Inno, obviously better than these. I mean, this race had a long tail, I suppose.
It did, and this Sir Jardin, or whatever you want to call him, he had pretty solid form line. So I think that, as you say, at least you don't know what to do with him when he's pulled up lame. But the first 3 across the line, I really think the winner has good upside going into major races. Just obviously got that little asterisk next to it coming out of a sales race. But it is a $2 million sales race that a lot of trainers now set their race for, so set their horse for. So it's not as if it's a weak race. You wouldn't think. No.
Look, I think most of these are probably more like 2-year-old opens and sort of any sort of black type. So treat them with a little bit of caution. But I mean, so far the forms seems to stack up out of the race quite well.
Yeah.
Look, going on to race 7, the 1,378, they've gone out 3.2 slow to the 800 and 1.7 slow to the 600. So below average tempo. Nothing much from my point of view to report here, except I was on Lady Banff that just got out.
I was on Lady Banff till my nose bled.
Wasn't
2 starts in a row. 2 starts in a row. I hate this horse with a passion.
Yeah, it's a tough horse to be on the right side of, but
if you remember, we talked about this. I go on about it. The Wallace second up horses racing a little bit flat. And I thought McDonald gives this horse the best ride of all time, Joviality, lobs it into a perfect position. As I say, the times aren't great. Like, they've gone pretty slow the whole way and didn't really rip home, especially compared to some other races of the day. This horse has got to the best part of the track, well back, short price favourite. Other horses in the race have got further out of the ground. So it's had every conceivable, this Joviality. And when it looked like it was going to put a margin on Lady Banff, it's gone one pace again and like fell in, to be fair. And I think it's another example of these stables. Just second up, they just tend to drop off a bit compared to especially if they perform really well first up.
Yeah, and it was sort of like 1,100 up to 1,300 with the 4 weeks off, and I just couldn't get it as short as the market had it. But they got the
I
job
figure
done
you
in
think
the
it's
end.
going to put 2 or 3 on them.
It did look like it was going to win more convincingly than what it did.
Yeah. And look, and again, we've got that sort of mob chasing them behind. Saigon was unlucky. The Incredulous Gene went back to the inside, but disappointing. And the one-pace horses down the outside, and not much between all of them. I think it's pretty steady form. And if Joviality is to go on, you would hope that is a flat run, and it has to bounce off that, because I don't think that form's going too far off what it did there.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move on. I think there's not much else to say
race,
about that race. So, look, we'd come to the Eskimo Prince, which was the 1200 Group 3. The pace in this race was very slow. They've gone out 8.4 slow to the 800 and 8.8 to the 600. So very slow all round, which doesn't really tell us much about this race, other than we can say the first 3 at least look like they've come back well, as has Halal in my mind, who ran the 8th best last 200 of the day, and certainly better than any other runner. Second slowest time race of the day in terms of ratings there. So, look, I don't know what to say. I mean, Paul Early got
barrier
the front.
trial, basically.
Barrier trial race.
A glorified barrier trial for at least the winner. I'd say Converge, and he sort of, at least he tries to make a run up the worst part of the ground and sort of peaks late. I think Ranch Hand's probably the most disappointing of the first 3 across the line. Just had every chance, looked more wound up. I don't think he runs 1200, to be honest. And then I agree with you, Halal was, and I didn't mind Captivant's run, because he went a bit earlier than Halal, and while Captivant was tiring after that one trial, Halal was sort of looked a lot more visually appealing because it was stronger through the line. But Captivant had probably already spent his biscuits by then. But I think this is dead set like a Tuesday trial at Rose Hill is how you would treat it.
I think so. Captivant was actually very well back, 10-1 into 11-2. So keep an eye on it. And Paulelli, 5-4 out to 2-1, and about almost 5-2 on Betfair.
This fella was good too. Maurice, my dad, he was probably the one that overachieved most in the race, but he's heading towards races like the Derby. So at least you know that he looks like he's returned a better horse.
Martinui also got a bit of specking there, John, 20s into 14s.
I had a peanut on it myself because I thought it would get that position outside lead or possibly even lead, but it was probably the worst run in the race by a long way.
Probably still worth keeping an eye on, I'd say, going forward. So all we can really say is that the first few across the line went okay, have come back well. Halal and Croctavant, both decent.
Palali couldn't have really paraded worse. It sort of got hot. It looked big. A lot more improvement to come. 1200, obviously it wasn't run like a 1200, so I'm not saying it's a gut buster. It's just a perfect lead up for the rest of whatever it's got going this prep. I want this horse to go back in distance, and this guy, I think he won't come into his own now until he gets to a mile. And same with the rest of them. Halal and Morris, me dad, they probably want a mile and further to come into their own, whereas this bloke's the sprinter out of the race.
Yeah, look, it's rated probably 2 to 3 lengths down on what it did first up last prep. So, as you say, it doesn't tell us much, and hopefully we'll get the opportunity to see these again.
Yep.
Excuse me.
This thing went like a rocket.
The next race, yes, Mautoi. How would you pronounce that? Is it Mautoi?
All I know is I tried to buy it 83 times because Tegan rode it to jump out one day and said it's a dead set Group 1 horse, and they couldn't get it to go within 50 metres of the gates because it was that big of a lunatic. And she's like, don't worry, I'll ride it up and down the trails for 6 months and I'll get his head right. And then, unfortunately, they figured some way to get him into the gates, and the rest is history. He's a nice horse, but they're still struggling to get him in the gates.
Yeah, look, Blinker's first time this horse after 2 pretty good trials, and certainly those tactics that it adopted Saturday weren't they weren't not.
He's not the cleanest away,
No. Stable's absolutely flying, 5-2 and a 9-4 to winner. It's gone to a new personal best for sure. In terms of the race speed, they've gone out to the 800, 1.9 lengths slow, which is below average, and by the time they got to the 600, bang on par. So average tempo there. It's certainly put the race away in those first sections. And look, in terms of ratings, just to give you an idea of how slow some of these races were run on the day, it ran the fastest rating on the day, 2 to 600 and 2 to 400, and the third fastest 2 to 200. So that gives you a bit more context in terms of how
loose leaders late in the day that get home, this is the one that actually did something, nothing incredible in the first half of the race, but at least did something to control the tempo and then did something off that tempo, whereas most of the others have just sprinted up for 3 furlongs and had an impossible task for those behind it.
Yep. Yeah, and obviously the first 2 favourites, So on Impact, slightly easy, started 7 to 4. They ran 1-2. So, look, the blinkers first time obviously was appreciated by the horse. It trialled that way. I think it trialled in the blinkers too, didn't it, John?
It did, and which is interesting for me because it was his first trial was a bit quiet, which was weird. Again, the horse is a pretty free-running horse, but the stable threw the blinkers on next time. Obviously, far more dominant in its second trial. I thought it would be vulnerable at the end of 1200, but a really good ride, a really good effort. I thought the second horse ran really well. I expected him to be too strong for this horse late, especially with the run they had. And the slight query with this guy was he was going to be a little bit one-paced second up on a Derby path after he was going up in distance, 11 to 12, but he probably just needs a little bit further. I thought he ran really well. This guy's just a little bit slick.
Yeah, look, I think that in that trial went about 7.5 lengths faster than the other open 10:30 heat on the day. So certainly a good effort.
That's stable. So they've produced 2 runners first up here in 2 weeks. Both of them halved their price. Both of them gone like rockets. So you're on the. I agree with you that their horses are flying in Sydney. Was there anything else in there that's hiding? Hang on. No. Nothing hiding in that race. I didn't think behind those 2 are clearly the 2 to go forward. Rustic Steel was okay, but every possible chance.
Indeed. Okay, on to the last race. This was an absolute picnic here for Jamie Carr in front. Got away with murder.
Bless her.
20.2 lengths. 20.2 lengths slow to the 800. 19.5 slow to the 600, which is around about 4 lengths per furlong slow to the 600 and 5 slow to the 800. So haven't seen a race in Sydney run that slowly for a long time. Don't know what the other riders were doing, letting her do that, but she obviously
I felt sick here because I thought they'd get full control, Purple Sector and Frosty Rocks, and I was stupid enough to talk to Tim earlier and say, listen, I think they're going to get full control. He's gone and got Lakeen into a far more prominent position, so I was filthy with myself here thinking, not knowing that they're going to be going out 20, that Tim's plonked this horse into a perfect spot, but why Bowman sat 3 lengths off this leader, just crazy. Like, he was never going to out-sprint it. He was definitely never going to out-sprint Lakeen, so his only chance was to be up there and sort of putting a bit of pressure on for at least from the 800, and he just never, ever goes near it. It's just like if you're going to show anyone a video of how to let a horse win, this is it.
Yeah, 6 to 1 in the 9 to 2 too, Purple Sector, and 7 to 2 in the 3, Lakeen, after had been supported at bigger prices earlier in the week. As you say, no pressure there, and they just let the winner get away with it. But well done to Jamie Carr and Bjorn Baker there.
Yeah, he loves the last race, and it's gone well. Like he's set up, like this is his time of year. If he goes back and finds another race like this where he can, like Rose Hill with the rail out, everyone loves that now, or similar circumstance where he's got a bit of a loose lead. He's a dangerous horse. He always is when he's up and hard fit. Lakeen's run really well again. Everything's run well here. I think this is actually a pretty strong race, and because it's run at such a bad tempo or a slow tempo, which hides a lot of the merit, I think some positives will come out. I think this horse, Purple Sector, is extremely hard to find in a race now. I think he's shown everything he's got to offer. Lakeen's a horse that needs things to go away, but these horses back in the field, no compromise. I thought Luncy's was really good late. I thought Mighty Bill was really good. It sort of made a long run and then got a little bit tired, so it sprinted past these. So I thought going back, actually. So Mighty Bill makes its run earlier, comes past and then peaks late. It's ready to go back up in distance, and I thought Luncy's was really good through the line. As it gets up in trip too, it'll be
definitely more competitive. I think second up in my mind, Luncey's, and as you say, Mighty Bell. I mean, obviously this race was the race where the best closing sectional ratings were going to come from, given that they have gone so slow up in front.
Yes. But it does hide like what they're obviously all going quick, and these ones are going quicker than the ones that are going quick. If you know, so that I think slow tempo races can often hide good merit, and the time can hide good merit from some of the big syndicates and things. I think that just it's always very difficult to judge runs off extremely slow tempos.
It is. And we've got a question about that too, I think, as well, which we'll cover. So in terms of horses to follow, John, out of the meeting, I've only got the two, Mautai and Luncey's for me.
Yeah, I liked Spacewalk's run in the first. I thought it went well, and they may miss it a little bit. Second up, I think Shadow Crush can win again. I really like the win of of Extravagant Star, and because it's coming out of that Millennium race, I'm probably happy to take the punt that form may be undervalued a little bit. Nothing out of race 7. I agree with you in race 8 that you can just ticks for Paulili, Halal, Converge going forward, and I think Mautai and Silent Impact are both on track for wherever they're heading to. I agree with that. And then the stays in the last, they were all okay, no compromise. Mighty Beale and Luncey's all confined races in the next 1 or 2 starts. I think, there's quite a bit out of that meeting.
Indeed. Look, of course, thanks to our sponsor, TopSport, who decided to get behind us, which we really appreciate. And John, we're going to get into the questions next. Do we want to start with the question of the week, or do you want to finish with the question of the week? Probably finish with the question of the week, I think. If you,
I've got to remember which one it is. Yeah, I do remember which one it is. So that's. I don't remember. Let's start with it, just so that we can get it out of the way.
Check your direct messages on Twitter, John, for me, and you'll see my vote, and then you can.
Well, I put it up before I got your vote, so it might not be the one you're thinking of. So we'll do it first, and then you can cross it off your list.
Okay, so Tony has got John's vote this week for the question of the week. And, of course, Tony will be the recipient of either $100 cash or $100 credit into his TopSport account if he has a TopSport account. If he doesn't, of course, he should have one. Tony, if you can get in touch and direct message me your details so we can ensure that is delivered to you. And his question, do you prefer to bet on a bias track or a fair track? What conditions and variables, rail position, etc., irrigation, weather, wind, give you the most confidence for this? Randwick in a certain rail position. John, do you want to start with this one?
Yeah, and I'm probably more aggressive with this sort of thing than maybe someone in your position would be. And I think this is probably nearly the key to probably 80% of the way I bet. They're definitely positions, and it can be the same track with 2 rail positions can be polar opposites for me, whether they're predictable or completely unpredictable. So, like Tari or somewhere like that, for an example, when the rail's in the true there, you can sort of make ground and you can do a lot of things. Well, as soon as they move the rail out 3 meters and it's not, strange weather, it's really, lead a fence, and you can set up a meetings at these sorts of places with a lot of confidence. And Rosehill, and most of the tracks are the same. When certain things line up, you can set up with more confidence, and that's when I like to bet the most, which makes sense. And I think you find a lot of tracks that are quite difficult to work out. For argument's sake, the Kenzo, and for me, like, it would be nearly impossible for me to ever bet there early, and for me to bet up during the day is difficult too, because the pattern can change. And I think, to me, it's everything. Having confidence in the surface and how the track's going to play for me to bet with confidence.
So really, you're a yes for the preference on the bias track.
Do you prefer to bet on bias tracks? Absolutely, or consistent tracks. So if that's what you want to call biased, I guess it is. It's just, even if they're fair track, it doesn't matter as long as they're consistent to me. So that's the most important part. It's just these certain tracks that play very differently for no particular reason, are the ones that I like to avoid.
For me personally, I agree with you. Bias is certainly something that I prefer to take advantage of. I mean, obviously other people see it, other people are aware of it, but there's still plenty of money around the place, especially early doors, that don't necessarily factor that in. And obviously late is when that becomes, or the truth of that becomes more potent. Obviously there are certain tracks where you would say, or certain situations where you would say that a bias track is not something that you would want to entertain. If they've verti drained any part of the track, or if they've significantly cut the grass shorter or longer in a certain section of the track and I'm not aware of it, or if you get rain throughout a meeting that creates a bias, they're situations that I don't like. And if I feel like that that's unfolding, I tend to pull back in terms of my bets. But, the Rose Hills, the Canterburys and the Gosfords and, Tarees and other tracks that you mentioned where they're quite consistent and quite predictable how they're likely to play based on time of year and climatic conditions and rail movement, then I think that they're ideal. As you say, you can set up the meeting with a little bit of more confidence and be a little bit more aggressive. And as you see it unfold throughout the day, of course, you can either dial it up or just go with your assessment, or peel it back if you feel that it's warranted to do so.
And it opens up so many more opportunities, even early betting, things like that. You can actually entertain it. There's not many, as I said, like I'd want to be getting 10-1 about a 6-4 chance at Kensington to want to pile into it early at all. It's just, I think there's a big difference in bias tracks. So consistent bias tracks, yes. Bias tracks, like you said, lanes and things like that. Anytime you have to rely on jockeys to interpret things the way you interpret them is dangerous. Like Saturday, for argument's sake, it took them 4 races to work out that inside, which was very heavily off, in my opinion, to ride the track correctly. A rail short Randwick. And it was a 6, I think, they put up early. So a rain-affected rail true. The fence has been off there for 20 years, and it still took them 4 races. So anytime jockeys have to predict a pattern, I'm a little bit worried.
Look, I think that's a fair point, and it's probably even more relevant at minor meetings. So if you're betting in the country and you've got a lot of those jockeys that simply have no idea, then you really are, as you say, putting some extra zeros on the wheel if you're betting on those meetings.
Off or something like that. If it's fence on, it's great because a lot of them don't even know it exists, and you can predict where the horse is going to be, and you kind of don't have to worry about it. But if it's fence off or they have to get going at a certain point or anything like that, like you say, it's extra zeros on the wheel that you're sort of you think it's a 1-on-1 makes 2 situation, but that's not always how it unfolds.
No, good question, Tony.
Question of the week.
Done. Question of the week. Okay, we'll go to one here from you, Little Beauty. Most punters agree that there's too many Group 1 races here in Australia. Which races should be relegated in status? Look, I've got a view on that, and I don't know obviously all of them off the top of my head, but races like the Victoria Derby, often it's quite a weak race, and races like Queen Elizabeth, getting that prize money elevation from I think it was $500,000 to $4 million at a fairly timely time. We can say that sales wise, and so I mean. Obviously, I suppose it depends on the edition, but a lot of the races that have been upgraded. I mean, Wink Stakes was another one, I think, which used to be a Group 2 or Group 3, and it was elevated to a Group 1. So some of those early season races in the spring, especially some of those perhaps shouldn't be Group 1s. John, have you got any ideas?
Not really. As a punter, it doesn't really affect me, but it does affect me as someone who likes to dabble around, mucking around, buying horses and things like that. Because I think I think a lot of, prize money and Group 1 status is driven by breeding, and a lot of it's a false economy. And I think that's my biggest gripe with the amount of Group 1s. From a racing fan's perspective, I believe that Group 1 should all be target or grand final races. And like you say, like the Wink Stakes, I know Bjorn's won it there with a horse. The only horses that tend to target that race are horses that may be not Group 1 horses that try and pinch a Group 1 because the others aren't ready. And that to me is probably the sign of a Group 1 that shouldn't be a Group 1. They should rarely clash. I know there's a drama between New South Wales and Victoria with that sort of programming now, but I think there's an insane amount of black type races across the board, and we've had black type races the last couple of weeks, and they're in off-season races with off-season horses. Just the only reason it makes sense is for breeders trying to increase the value of stallions and mares, and it doesn't make sense to most of the racing population.
Well said. Well said. Okay, one here from Graham Cox. G'day, John. Question for Monday's show. I had a small bet on King Ratel on Saturday because its last 2 runs had some merit. The 4th run this prep at 1,600 metres had me concerned that it might want further. I expected, but I'm a bad judge, the morning price to be at least hold, but there was plenty who found it. Did the Smarties find more merit in the runs than I gave it credit for? The small bet was only for my mental health. Had the price stayed longer, I would have had more on. Is this a good approach or a poor one long term?
I'll answer because I had nearly the same thoughts, as in a horse that's going really well. Blinkers on was obviously, you could only see it as a positive because it needed something. Dropping back in grade was ideal. I didn't have a real issue with the mile. Probably a little bit further would have been better, but my biggest issue was where it was going to be in the run and the way I thought the race would be run. And as I said, it was a strange mix how it unfolded. I don't know if he wins if the horses up on speed are ridden to the pattern of the track. He probably doesn't run them down, but he was a horse going very well in a race that was likely to be run not in his favour, and he's overcome that. So he can't be a short price horse in the race, and I think he's pretty close to the mark, whereas $13, $14, $15 in the morning was silly. It got probably into about its right price, $8, $9, $10, whatever it finished up, and it's run probably better than most expected.
Well, it was well out of the handicap. I mean, on official ratings, it was well out of the handicap, which could have turned some people off too. And I suppose the other pluses for the horse was that it was, fourth up. The third up run came off a 31-day break. It was the same course and distance, as you say, dropping grade, blinkers on first time this prep, perhaps a slightly stronger jockey. I think all of those things.
And he found the right part of the track. So he was possibly a little bit flattered, but he has had merit in his performance again.
Indeed. I mean, I must admit, I didn't find it at what it started, but I suppose I'm always going to be a little bit against those sort of horses that map that way in these types of races.
But I agree what he said. He's had a little bit on it because he had reservations. He would have had more on it if it was a bigger price. I agree with that. I agree with everything.
So does the betting support then lend the argument that he perhaps should have topped up because the market's saying we like this horse?
I think I don't think that way because I'm not. I think the horse. I think it just got back in towards. I think it got into the closer to what it should have been. So the market sort of trued up. That's for sure. But does that mean you should have more on it because the market's brought it into where it should be? I don't know. Not for that sort of horse because it's not going to be in a really prominent spot and make its own luck. Anyway, I think it's a hard. Those sort of horses are hard to price.
So it's not necessarily a good approach or a bad approach long term, is it? I suppose you've just got to bet how you see comfort.
Circumstantially, for that horse, it's had a weird prep, missed runs, same distance, a few runs in a row. They obviously didn't target that race on Saturday. It was just really hard to line that horse up.
Rightio. Got a couple of questions here from Chris. Just the Paulelli versus the Converge race. If Converge gets Ranch Hands run, is it a different story? Was this lane penalised or was Polelli winning anyway? Look, I mean, what do you think, John?
I think the race was over. 600 or 700 meters out, Polelli's always going to be able to sprint home off the tempo it had, and I don't think that Converge is in a position to pressure the tempo from anywhere earlier. And if he did, as he showed, like he obviously went up the worst ground and tried to sprint with Polelli, and he probably peaked late. So I don't think you can say that Converge would have won the race. Would the race have been run any differently? Probably not, because Converge probably needed to be outside Polelli to press the tempo or change the race dynamic, and he would never have got to that spot. I think it would have been a similar result, and I think if Ranch Hand had been in the spot where Converge was made ground in the worst part, it would have been far weaker late than Converge was. I think that I think Polelli wins no matter what.
I agree. I think Converge there, obviously better off over 14 to 1600.
Yep.
And first up, it ran as well as it could. Polelli, I think, wins the race no matter what. That's my take. And the other question, of course, was how did they let Carr get away with murder on Frosty, especially given how the track was playing as the day went on? I've got no explanation for that.
No, and I don't think it had anything to do with the way the track was playing. It was I don't think the track was leader biased. I think they just got a few leaders who were either well ridden or got away with murder. I don't really think the track was any way, shape, or form like dried out or anything crazy like that. It was just a really poorly judged race from everyone but Jamie Carr.
Yep, I think that's all you can say about it. This is from Les. In analysing a horse and the chances in a race, how much of their form is relevant, i.e. current prep, 6 months, 12 months? For me, Les, it's all about current form, assuming we're not talking about horses who are resuming or coming off a break. I say current form, unless there's a reason to suggest that you should look back further than that. If the current form, for instance, are coming off forgive runs or horses or runs where the horse was totally unsuited, then of course you'd be crazy to sort of place too much emphasis on those runs. So you're really looking for the most recent form that fits the type of profile of the race that you're stepping into in terms of pace shape and likely distance, etc. And only going back and looking at a horse's runs further back if you think that there is a reason to perhaps not or to ignore the most recent form for those situations we've talked about, or if there's something else that makes you sort of look back, a gear change or a significant gear change that the horse hasn't had for a long time, that it's previously proven to be very successful with. That could be one of those scenarios. But obviously, older form, 6 months, 12 months is form that you still keep in the back of your mind so that you know where a horse is likely to get to as it moves through a preparation.
Yeah, I agree. I think the more recent the form, the more relevant, the more emphasis, the more confidence you can have in what that horse is going to do. You want to stress test the horse to see whether it's suited in this race, like you say, and that depends on pattern of the day, stage of the preparation, how the race is going to be run, where you think the horse is going to be. And you can go back and look at similar situations this horse may have faced previously and try and see how it's going to improve today or how you expect it to race. Absolutely. But I think, anything, the more recent, the better. So like horses first up, if you don't have a trial, things like that, it's much harder to have confidence than if you do have more information.
Agreed. A couple of questions here, a question here, which is broken down into a couple of parts from David O'Driscoll. For both of us, that is, John, what are your most profitable bets? Are they early market bets or mid-meeting when you've realised the pattern and can bet in later races that same day or backing one of the fancied horses that's drifting and you understand why? First up, worrying map, etc. Races with false favourites, etc. I'll lead to you, John, first.
Jeez. Difficult. Certainly don't bet anywhere near as much early now. I think the market could basically collapse if you breathe on them. So unless you've got some superstar West Indian bowlers that are ready to throw in some bets for you, it's very difficult to bet into early markets now. So it's very difficult to be profitable long term. And I think most importantly, you basically cut off your nose to spite your face if you play in these early markets now. So I think most of my betting's done mid to late in the meetings. As a pattern, and I think it is certainly far easier to be more confident. Drifting markets and things, I bet into my area, so country and provincial, much more confidently with drifts and things like that, because I do believe that I've got more chance of explaining them and having an edge over the market in those areas than people playing on bulk like your big syndicates and things. So sticking in my areas, I'll be more confident with things like drifts. I do like trying to identify false favourites. That's one of my favourite betting options, especially with stuff that I send out to subscribers and things like that, because they're great races usually to bet into, and I do like backing more than one runner in a race quite often as well, and it's very difficult to do that if you're betting in the lower end of the market. So hope that's some sort of insight into how I do it. I couldn't tell you what are my most profitable bets, but I know that my pattern of betting is far more throughout the meeting these days.
Okay, for me, very little early betting these days. I think unless you specialise in that and have the required number of accounts, either through your own name or through some friends, then it's a pretty difficult gig. For me, I also don't like betting until I actually see what's happening in those first couple of races. The fact that I might anticipate a bias doesn't mean it's always going to pan out that way, obviously. And sometimes it's going to be more severe, sometimes less severe or not there at all, or sometimes it'll be different to what I expect, and that can prove to be problematical. I tend to like betting into situations where I can expect a track to play differently to perhaps what the mainstream ideas might be. And when I can see some early confirmation of that, then I like to get involved in some of those later races of the day and try and capitalise on some of those prices before they change. As far as my most profitable bets, look, I suppose it just comes back to what I think are the leading market chances. I don't necessarily have a subset that I can put my hands on to say these are the most profitable bets or these are the attributes that lead to them being most profitable. But obviously when I disagree with the market and I get it right, they're obviously going to be the most successful races to play. And it just stands to reason, my price versus market price. And
even if you get it wrong and they cross the line first, they're the ones you want, don't they? They're the ones you want.
Well, yeah, exactly. Obviously you want those horses. But look, I mean, you sometimes a seemingly easy day can prove out to be otherwise, and sometimes a difficult day can be or can prove to be your most profitable days. But certainly, picking up on track pattern early in a meeting, and if you've already planned for that and you're able to dial it up because you think it might be more severe than what you originally anticipated, so you're obviously going to be applying bonuses or bigger bonuses to horses and penalties to the ones that aren't going to be suited. So that really can help you get an extra edge. But look, other people in the market are sort of thinking the same thing too. So I suppose you've just got to do what works for you, and it's going to be different for everybody. There's no magic formula, Dave. Great.
Lucky last.
No, second last. I've got one left. Two left, sorry. This is from Nigel Chaplin. The Twitter sphere is full of punters landing successful multis. However, the opinions are often varied of whether it's a wise betting practice. Under what circumstances do you two consider taking multis? I know you're going to be more detailed than me, John. I'm just going to say I don't do it. I've done it before, obviously. I've never had a lot of success with it. I find that it tends to shelf the accounts pretty quickly if you are playing down that path, but that's just my view. John, what do you think?
Oh, I love them because you can get on and obviously, as it's again, country provincial, even more difficult to get on straight out. So in a perfect world, I wouldn't have to take them. If you could ring up and say, Mr. Daly, can I back this to win 20,000? And the next one, can I back to win $200? And then the next one, 50,000. We would never have an issue and never have to take multis so often. But I think for me, if I'm really confident in more than one race on the day, I'll often mess around with multis because it helps you, number one, to get on and number 2, they usually firm quite dramatically at times. So, if I can get the top odds on both of them for a result, I will. And so I think that it's just more a product of how the betting landscape for me is fallen, and I enjoy them too, which is probably not part of being a professional gambler, I guess. But I do certainly enjoy messing around with the multis, and if you do get a day where everything goes the way you expect and set the meetings up, and you get a bonus out of it, and I do like that sort of thing, and you do need a bit of joy in this industry because it is hard at times.
It's certainly a skill that it's not easy to do in my mind, and I just don't do it. But John, you obviously
it's not, and you've got to expect runs of outs too with them. They're not going to land all the time. There's obviously different ways of playing things. Like I'll even, if you've got a set up at a country meeting where, say, a fence is good and you've identified 2 or 3 horses you expect to get really positive trips in transit, rather than backing them all to win, you can mess around with things like place multis and stuff, which sort of cover options for you. And there's different ways that a lot of people play. I mean, had my eyes open to it from other people, like in chat rooms and stuff, and subscribers. It's interesting. If you identify things early, I like to mess around with multis, because the markets can change so dramatically, more country and provincial than city, come race time. And if you can identify things early, there's definite upside to it.
So given that you might have put horses into a multi, are you then looking to back them as well?
Usually, and especially the earlier legs, absolutely. But I would never rely on a multi, like a later leg, if you know what I'm saying. You would never expect legs to win to be able to get set on the last leg. I treat them more as a bonus than an outlay, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Okay, last question here from Ben Salmon. Interesting to hear views on race pace and race ratings. Given 3 races, both at 1,200 and 1,600 on Saturday, does the overall rating adjust for race pace to the 800 or 600? Do you adjust the overall rating to race class or strictly part-time adjustment? So I suppose I might
I'll just leave that one to you, Paul.
Ben, look, it's a great question. It's without giving too much away, I look at all aspects of the race in terms of race quality. So when I'm trying to identify race quality, which is really what I'm trying to put a number on, not the individual performance of a horse, that comes as a secondary calculation and is pretty much automated. But the race quality itself isn't about class. So we're not talking, a la Don Scott, a welter's better than a restricted race, or an open handicap's better than a welter. I don't really look at the class heading of the race when I'm reviewing the races. It all comes down to what the race was expected to rate versus what it did rate. In saying that, the computer forms an assessment, which is an automated process of what it thinks the horse will rate, the race will rate, based on the lead-up form of the horses engaged. And then the times and sectionals will provide an adjustment to that figure. And then I've got to weigh up, given the evidence there, what I think is most appropriate. For me, though, I do look at the race pace, and I do factor it both to the 800 and the 600. And the reason why, and I think it's probably a good question that you asked, is that it can often change. There can be a significant change to the 800 versus the 600 sometimes. So
a big difference to the outcome of a race if pace is injected from the 800 or the 600. Big difference, and big difference if it's not, and or even later. So huge.
Well, the critical sections are often 8 to 4, 8 to 6, and 6 to 4. I mean, that's pretty much when the races are often determined in terms of which horses are going to have winning chances or not. If they slow down between the 8 and the 400, it often gives, even if it's a slowly run race, it'll often give horses back in the field the opportunity to make cheap ground without doing any work. And the same, of course, if it's 6 to 4, or sometimes it's only a 400-meter sprint in some races. So exactly, the answer is when I make race time adjustments, I'm doing it against part times for the purposes of pace. And in terms of class, well, as I say, I don't really look at the class of the race. So the answer is you must adjust. It's how you do it. I mean, a good example of those 3 mile races we had Frosty Rocks clearly the slowest to the 800 and the 600. And I would say that the difference in times and sectionals adjustments between, say, race 3, which is King Ratel's race, where they went out average, versus the last race where they went out very slow, I would say that the adjustment to the race because of pace might only be around about half a length or so in terms of the adjustment I make as a result of that. So obviously, if you take times on face value, the last race was the slowest of the day. But that was obviously because of the pace shape. Yeah. So you've got to be able to look past just what they ran and understand the context of it. I hope that answers the question.
Tough one.
Okay.
Good answer.
We've done pretty well, just over an hour this week. John, thanks very much for your time again. Of course, if you want to look at John's stuff, it's racingwatch.com.au. He runs a 7-day service, John, pretty much.
Pretty much, yeah. Well, we're at least in the chat room 7 days. I'm just trying to tidy it all up at the moment, what I actually do provide. But I want to try and target more the meetings, as one of those questions pointed out, like really get into meetings where I can set them up with confidence and provide a bit more detailed information. And the other meetings where you got question marks and you have to play them during the day, I'd rather probably give them a miss officially and be able to sort of provide information if something pops up. But 7 days a week pretty much.
And of course, if you want to know more about our database, ratingstowin.com.au, you can shoot me a message via email or on Twitter. You could obviously ask John any questions about his service the same way. And of course, if you've got questions for next week's show and you want to send them early, jump the queue by all means. We really need them in by 11:30 Eastern Standard Time at the absolute latest, which is about half an hour before we go to air. So we need time to compile it and also select the question of the week, which wins its asker $100. Of course, Tony did the job this week. And of course, once again, thanks to TopSport for getting behind us and providing that support, and certainly makes it easier to continue delivering good content. All the best.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, guys.